You ever get excited to finally get your website up and running, finally get yourself online? But then when you finally sit down to it, you're staring at that blinking cursor on an empty screen. It can be a little intimidating, right?
Yeah, you can feel like there's just so much to do.
And where do you even start?
Right.
Well, that's kind of what we're diving into today. We're looking at Web Warriors, the podcast by Sarah, the design guru, and Jake, the tech whiz.
Yes, Web Warriors.
They've got a ton of experience building websites, and they aren't afraid to share, both their wins and their fails, which I really appreciate.
Right, total transparency.
So I thought we could dig into some of their insights on how to get a website up and running.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so right from the start, they talk about how it can be really overwhelming to choose a platform.
Yeah, like where do you even begin? Right.
Seriously. WordPress, Wix, Squarespace.
And there are even more than that out there. And they all kind of do their own thing, but there's a lot of overlap too.
Yeah, and each one has its own learning curve.
Oh, yeah.
So Web Warriors really emphasizes that there's not one right answer for everybody. It depends so much on what you're trying to do.
Totally. It's all about figuring out what's going to work for you.
Exactly. And they say it's super important to know your own, technical comfort level before you dive in.
Definitely. Like in one episode, Jake talks about how he tried to build this whole e-commerce site on a platform that was really just meant for simple blogs.
Oh no, I bet that was a nightmare.
It was. Let's just say he learned that lesson the hard way.
Yikes. So it sounds like they're big on choosing the right platform for the job.
Absolutely.
But it's not just about the tech stuff, is it? I mean, I know I can get really hung up on how things look.
Oh, for sure. Sarah calls it design paralysis. Like you get so focused on making things look pretty that you forget about whether or not the site actually, works.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty big oversight.
It is. You don't want people to leave your site because they can't figure out how to, sign up for your email list.
Right. Or buy your product.
Exactly.
So Web Warriors talks a lot about the user experience, what they call UX.
UX, right.
It's all about thinking about how someone's going to interact with your site.
So what they click on, where that takes them on the site.
Exactly.
That's
That design has to work too.
Yeah.
And it can't just be pretty. It has to be usable.
It's like they say form follows function or something like that.
Right. And Web Warriors has a bunch of advice about that whole process.
Oh, good. Because like we were saying earlier, you don't want to send people running away from your website. You want them to stick around.
Exactly.
So how do you make a website that's going to be engaging, make people want to stay a while? What does Sarah and Jake have to say about that?
Well, first they say you really have to think about what your visitors are looking for.
Right.
Like, what are they actually trying to find when they land on your website?
Right, because they're there for a reason.
Exactly. And it might not be to, admire your awesome color scheme or your fancy animations.
Yeah, fair enough.
So Web Warriors talks a lot about the importance of understanding your target audience.
Your ideal visitor.
Right. Like, who are these people?
What are they interested in?
What problems are they trying to solve?
And how can your website help them solve those problems?
Exactly. So once you have a good handle on who you're talking to, you can start thinking about what kind of content they're going to find valuable.
Which makes a lot of sense, because if you give people what they want, they're more likely to stick around.
Exactly. It's not rocket science, but it's amazing how many websites miss the mark on this.
Yeah, it's like they forget that they're building the website for other people, not just for themselves.
Totally. And that's where SEO comes in.
Ah, yes, SEO.
Search engine optimization.
The mysterious world of SEO.
Well, it doesn't have to be mysterious.
Okay, good.
Jake does a really good job of demystifying it in one of the episodes.
Oh, really? Tell me more.
So he starts by explaining that SEO is basically just about making it easy for search engines to understand what your website is all about.
Okay, so it's like speaking Google's language.
Exactly. It's about using the right words and phrases in your content so that when someone searches for something related to your site,
Google knows to show your site in the search results.
bingo. And the higher you rank in those search results,
The more likely people are to find you.
you got it. It's all about visibility.
Visibility, because what good is a website if nobody can find it?
Right. It's like having an amazing store hidden down a back alley with no sign.
Nobody's going to find it no matter how great your products are.
Exactly. So SEO is basically your way of putting a giant flashing sign on your website that says,
Hey, Google, over here. This is what we've got.
you got it. And the cool thing is,
What's that?
SEO isn't some kind of dark art that only a select few can master.
Oh, good.
Jake breaks it down into practical steps that anyone can take.
Like what?
Well, he talks a lot about keyword research.
Finding the right words to use.
Exactly. And he gives some great tips on how to do that, like using tools like Google Keyword Planner.
Handy. So it's about finding out what people are actually typing into that Google search bar.
Exactly. You want to use the same language that your target audience is using.
Makes sense.
And then you want to sprinkle those keywords naturally throughout your content.
Okay, so it's not just about stuffing your website with as many keywords as possible.
Definitely not. Google is smarter than that these days.
Oh, I bet.
If you try to trick the system, Google will know, and they'll penalize you for it.
So it's about finding that balance between using keywords strategically.
And creating content that's actually engaging and informative for your human visitors.
Right, because ultimately those are the people you're trying to reach.
Exactly. And Web Warriors talks a lot about how to create content that's both good for SEO and good for people.
Which sounds like a win-win.
Absolutely. They share tips on writing compelling headlines.
The first thing people see.
Right. And structuring your content in a way that's easy to read and digest.
Because nobody wants to read a giant wall of text.
Exactly. So they really emphasize the importance of making your content scannable.
Scannable!
Right. Using things like headings, subheadings, bullet points, images.
To break up the text to make it more visually appealing.
Exactly. Because, let's be honest,
People's attention spans are pretty short these days.
they are. So you have to make it easy for them to find what they're looking for and digest your content quickly.
Otherwise, they'll just click away.
Exactly. And that's the last thing you want.
So we've talked about choosing the right platform, understanding our target audience.
And optimizing our website for search engines.
But what about when things inevitably go wrong?
Ah, yes. Because, let's face it,
Building a website isn't always sunshine and roses.
definitely not. There will be bumps in the road.
Glitches, errors, those moments where you just want to throw your computer out the window.
Been there, done that.
Ah.
But Web Warriors reminds us that those moments are all part of the process.
They are, and they can actually be some of the best learning experiences.
Totally. In fact, Jake and Sarah dedicate a whole episode to sharing their website woes.
Website woes.
Yes, it's all about those moments that had them banging their heads against the keyboard.
Oh, I love those stories.
Me too. They're so relatable.
So what kind of website woes do they talk about?
Well, in one episode, Jake tells this hilarious story about spending hours trying to integrate a booking system into an e-commerce site.
Okay, that sounds painful.
It was. He had chosen this plugin that he thought would be perfect.
But
But it turned out that the plugin was completely incompatible with the theme he was using.
no, so the whole thing just blew up in his face.
Pretty much. He had to scrap all his work and start over.
Ah, that's the worst.
It is. But he learned a valuable lesson from that experience.
Which is,
Always, always, always double-check compatibility before you invest a ton of time and energy into something.
good advice. So it's not just about choosing the right tools.
It's about making sure they all play nicely together.
Right, like pieces of a puzzle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of puzzles, Sarah shares a story about a client who wanted this incredibly interactive animated website.
Okay, sounds fun.
It was. But there was a catch.
What's that?
The client didn't have the budget for custom animations.
Oh, no. That's a tough one.
It was. But Sarah's a problem solver.
So what did she do?
Well, she ended up finding these open source animation libraries.
Open source.
Yeah, which means they're free to use.
Awesome.
Right. So she was able to adapt these existing animations to fit the client's vision.
Without breaking the bank.
Exactly. It was a stroke of genius.
It sounds like these website woes episodes are full of valuable lessons.
They really are. And one of the key takeaways is the importance of planning.
Planning.
Yes, it might seem counterintuitive.
Like, shouldn't building a website be this free-flowing creative process?
It can be, but as Jake says,
What does he say?
a little planning up front can save you a world of pain down the road.
So true. But what does planning actually look like in the context of building a website? Is it just about choosing a color scheme and a catchy domain name?
It's so much more than that. Web Warriors has a whole episode on planning, and Sarah really breaks it down.
Oh, does she have like a system or something?
Yeah, she calls it content first design.
Content first design. Tell me more.
So you start by figuring out all the information you need on your website.
Like the text for each page.
Yep. And the images, videos, testimonials, all of it.
Okay.
Then you design the actual website around all that content.
Interesting. So instead of like, I don't know, designing a beautiful homepage and then trying to shoehorn in the content later,
Yeah.
you're saying figure out the content and then let that drive the design.
Exactly. Because otherwise you end up redesigning everything once you realize you don't have the right sections for your content.
Right.
And then Jake chimes in on that episode too, about choosing the right hosting plan early on.
Oh, right. Hosting. That's the thing that makes your website live on the internet, right?
Yep. And he's got a point about not skimping on this.
What do you mean?
Well, Jake says it's like the engine of your car, right? Like,
Yeah,
you wouldn't put this tiny little engine in a giant truck and expect it to tow a trailer up a mountain.
good point.
So you got to make sure your hosting plan can handle all the traffic coming to your site and everything you're asking it to do.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've covered a lot here. Choosing a platform, understanding our audience, SEO, dealing with those website woes, and of course, planning.
And don't forget, learning as you go.
Yeah,
Jake's always saying that the web development world moves so fast.
that's true.
Like there's always something new to learn. New tools, new technologies, always something.
So true. So how do you even keep up?
Well, Jake's a big fan of online courses. He says there's so many resources out there, even free stuff on YouTube, where you can learn at your own pace.
That's really encouraging to hear because sometimes it feels like everyone else out there is, building these complex websites and I'm just sitting here feeling lost.
I know what you mean, but Web Warriors really emphasizes that everyone starts somewhere.
They do, and they're very encouraging. So as we wrap up, what's the one big thing you hope our listeners take away from Web Warriors?
Honestly, I think it's that building a website doesn't have to be this scary, impossible thing.
Right.
It's definitely challenging at times, but it's also incredibly creative and rewarding to build something yourself, something that reflects you. And like Web Warriors shows us, with the right tools and resources and maybe a few deep breaths along the way, it's totally doable.
Love that. So listeners, if you're feeling stuck or intimidated, just remember, every website out there started with an idea, a blank page, and someone who was willing to learn. So take that first step and see where it takes you. You never know, you might just surprise yourself.